Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've technically got good, bad, and crazy martinis today, but there's an element of crazy to all of them. First of all, just when you thought Gen Z was doing life better than the millennials, you'll find out that their approach to work is very bizarre compared to where we come from a Gen X approach. You'll be amazed. You'll just be amazed at what they are doing to get jobs and to get their work done once they have jobs. We'll also be talking about wanting to live forever. And no, we're not talking about the song Fame from the early 1980s, but evil dictators. So that's always fun. And we'll also be talking about just how weird those Biden years were, particularly in the wake of COVID and everything else, where the left's aggressive, socially, culturally far left agenda just got so much momentum, people didn't know what to do about it. So we'll talk about all of that in just a second, but let's start with Caldera Lab, because when you hear some of these stats on Gen Z in the workplace, you're gonna get some lines in the face, and I'm guessing their parents have probably already got them. So Caldera Lab is here for you guys. Their high-performance skincare is designed specifically for men, simple, effective, and backed by science.
You know, when you read about Gen Z, you're going to probably feel old. But Billy Crystal used to say on Saturday Night Live, it's more important to look marvelous than to feel marvelous. And just because you're feeling old doesn't mean you have to look old. Because of Caldera Lab's cutting-edge formulas that are developed by leading cosmetic chemists who specialize in men's skincare. They have rigorous R&D cycles, so every product takes years to develop, test, and perfect. If they don't love it, they're not going to sell it. It's non-comedogenic formulas, no laughing, but also it means they won't clog your pores, certified cruelty-free, which means no animal testing ever, and their products are plastic neutral. For every product sold, they remove the same amount of plastic from the environment.
In a consumer study, 100% of men said their skin looked smoother and healthier. You can't beat that. 97% noticed improved hydration and texture, and almost 94% reported a more youthful appearance. I love the cleanser, and I got the good. You've got the base layer. It's all, like Jim said, quality, deep research into this. They wouldn't release it if it didn't work well. Upgrade your skincare with Caldera Lab. It's easy, effective, and made for men. Skip the drugstore and try it for yourself. Visit calderalab.com/3ml and use the code 3ml for 20% off your first order. Again, that's calderalab.com/3ml with the code 3ml for 20% off. All right, Jim, on to our good martini, but certainly crazy to think about where we were not that long ago in this country when it came to cultural issues. Now, as was crystallized, I think, in the 2024 campaign, Americans pretty strongly against biological men in women's spaces, in women's sports, kids being given hormones and surgeries and that sort of thing. But in terms of what you could even talk about for a while there during the Biden years, it was just absolutely crazy. And you talk about it in the Morning Jolt today with the prominent writer Malcolm Gladwell, who felt that you couldn't tell the truth about men and women's sports and about other issues related to the whole transgender topic because, of course, you could lose your job. You could be shunned on social media and everything else. And people were just basically frightened and clamming up.
I was going to say, it's really an extraordinary interview with Gladwell on a podcast. You know, it's not often we tout other podcasts on this podcast, but nonetheless, this is a fascinating conversation. This podcast is called The Real Science of Sport. Co-hosts are a sports scientist professor, Ross Tucker, and sports journalist, Mike Finch. And just right out of the gate at the beginning of the podcast, they talk about Malcolm Gladwell chairing a session at the Sloan Conference at MIT in Boston. It's a panel discussion on trans athletes. He says that the panel was stacked against him, but that's not particularly surprising. But what is surprising is that he says this is about 2022, so about 4 years, 3-4 years ago. Gladwell says, my suspicion is that 90% of the people in the audience were on your side, meaning arguing that there is a fundamental difference between men and women and that how you identify does not change that. And therefore, it is unfair for male athletes to be competing against female athletes. But only 5% of the audience was willing to admit it. And Tucker says, well, my recollection is that everything I said was met with deathly silence. Everything the other two said got cheered. But then Gladwell goes on to say that, like, no, actually, I think, there were some people who are ideologically committed to it, but that if we did a replay of that exact panel, it runs in exactly the opposite direction. But he says the trans athlete on the panel at one point turned to this guy, Ross, and says, Ross, you have to let us win. And he emphasizes is they're not asking for a place at the table. They're not asking for respect, to be treated with respect and dignity. What they're asking is for no one to question the considerable physiological advantage they bring to the sport, and for no one to question if they're going to win these races by 5 seconds, suck it up. That's what they're asking. And he eventually says, he goes down and says, this is nuts. And on the one hand, it's good to see Gladwell coming out and saying, yeah, this is mass hysteria. And then, in fact, a very small percentage of the public actually thought that there either was no difference between those born male and those born female, and that if there was a difference, it was immaterial and did not represent a significant factor in the sport and was not something for anybody worth getting upset about. And so I've seen, some of my readers this morning are like, well, thanks, great for him to come out now that it's safe, et cetera. And I get that feeling. I also note that it's never fun to come out and admit that you were wrong. It's never fun to come out and admit that you went along with something that deep in your gut you knew wasn't right. And so I guess I think, Gladwell should be commended for coming out and saying something that probably wasn't easy to say. I think it's also very, very, even if you want to dismiss him as a weather vane, it is very good and useful to see that the weather vane is pointing in the right of center direction than the left of center direction. I also kind of just elaborated a bit on the phenomenon of Blue Sky, which is a social media platform for progressives who decided that once Elon bought Twitter/X, it became too right-wing for them, and they had to exodus into their own safe one. Greg, if we wanted to get progressives safely contained, where their message would not break out to the broader public, they're quarantined, basically. They're masked, like ICE agents, you could say. And now they all spend time fighting amongst themselves. And apparently, they're going around seeing who's still on Twitter because they don't think you should be on both, Blue Sky and Twitter at the same time. Noah Smith, who's an economist, who says basically they've retreated into an insane asylum, and now they spend time arguing amongst themselves. Now, if that were really the case, our show would be nothing but good martinis every day. So it's probably not quite as dire as he makes it sound, but it is this fascinating degree to which a certain segment of progressives have become so unable to handle disagreement that they need to go off to their own little enclaves where they know they're not going to run into anybody who disagrees with them. And, on paper, they could make an argument that those born male should be participating in female sports. I think they're going to have a real hard time, but they could try. But you'd have to use facts and logic, and you couldn't just call somebody transphobic or call somebody hateful or a bigot or something like that. And without that, they would rather take their bat and their ball and go home and play sports with their, it's kind of fascinating to see the retreat of progressives who have decided the rest of society isn't worth interacting with if they can't berate them into submission, which, is not really the way things are supposed to work here in America.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned the pendulum is swinging now because there was a time where you would be in huge trouble, whether you're in corporate America or a public school teacher or somewhere else, and having the views that Ross Tucker had back in 2022 in defending girls' sports being girls only. And so the good news here is obviously that the climate has changed where you can speak out on that. I obviously think on the left, there is still a lot of shaming or attacking of anyone. You saw that with the shooting in Minneapolis last week. No, you can't bring that up, but we can only talk about guns. And so I think the next step here is to not only obviously say that men don't belong in women's spaces or women's sports. Let's start talking about how gender-affirming care is the exact opposite of gender-affirming care. And so, convincing people that they were not born in the wrong body is probably the healthiest thing for them, or else they end up with a lot more confusion than they started with and unfortunately tend to lash out. Not all of them, obviously, but it's not a 0%. And if we can help them, we should.
Just, you mentioned the Minnesota shooting. Imagine if the dominant argument we'd heard from, first of all, you'd argue for 24 hours after a shooting, you probably should pause, let the facts get learned before you jump in to try to establish a narrative. But imagine if they said, wow, this is someone who had really deep-rooted mental health, psychological issues, and it probably manifested in the way they interpreted their gender identity and in their desire to kill lots of people. And, to try to make an argument. Instead, it turned into, oh, you can't, this person may or may not be, we'll never know the motive. Never mind that they literally wrote the motive all over the guns. There was kind of this amazing sense of, you can't talk about that, which I think whenever you're making that argument, that's a concession of defeat. That's a sign that no, we can't win this argument by openly discussing it. We can only win this argument by ensuring that there's not open discussion around it.
Exactly. So the battle here about the truth and the right way forward is not over yet, but the momentum seems to be on the side, not even just of the right, but of people who understand the basics of biology and common sense here. So anyway, let's talk about open phone. And look, if you're running a business, you know that every time you miss a call, you're leaving money on the table. And when every customer conversation really matters, you've got to have a phone system that keeps up and helps you stay connected. And that's why you need Open Phone.
With AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, you'll be able to automate your follow-ups, ensuring that you'll never miss a customer interaction again. So whether you're a one-person operation that's just drowning in calls and texts, or you have a large team that needs better collaboration tools, Open Phone is a no-brainer. See why more than 50,000 businesses trust Open Phone to manage their businesses' calls and texts.
Yeah, Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. And Open Phone right now is offering our listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ML. That's OPENPHONE.com/3ML. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. Also a tinge of crazy. Vladimir Putin was in China yesterday as China put on a big military parade to mark 80 years since the Japanese surrender. China, of course, one of the allies in World War II, but those were the Chiang Kai-shek Chinese, not the communist Chinese who came in a few years later, unfortunately. And Kim Jong-un was there as well. It's kind of like, the axis of evil of the current generation there. And so they're walking through, and you write about this in the corner today, and a hot mic picks them up in their native languages, so there's no point in playing the clip. But Xi Jinping is saying essentially, we're basically 70 years old here, but 70 years old is like a child now. And, we got many years to go thanks to technology. And then Putin goes on about biotechnology and getting organ retransplants with younger organs. And basically, you can always stay young and maybe even become immortal. So, this is pie in the sky stuff. Obviously, with technology and medical advancements, we live longer than we used to. And it's possible we, could bump that number up to some extent. But the idea of immortality is ridiculous. And of course, when you're a dictator and you love having absolute power in your country, you want to hang on to it as long as possible. So what do you make of this actual conversation between these guys?
Simultaneously not shocking and yet pretty disturbing. And let me kind of walk people through. First of all, I'm not surprised that the leaders of these three countries are getting together, particularly that they're marking 80 years since the end of World War II. Russia and China are just going to love any time they get to reminisce about when they were the good guys. It was a long time ago. But yes, all right. So yes, good for you guys. You were on the right side of World War II. A lot of mistakes since then. But anyway, so for those wondering, Vladimir Putin is going to turn 73 next month. A lot of people speculated about him having health issues over the years. It's very hard to get any reliable information about that. Some people speculated, does he use body doubles and stuff like that? As of this recording, Vladimir Putin's heart is still beating, sadly. And, he, as to the extent he has a heart, it appears to be functioning well enough for a, almost 73-year-old man, or as Joe Biden would say, a youngster. Xi Jinping is even younger at 72, just turned 72 in June. And look, so this might be just the two of them talking small talk, that they're around the same age. But I think what one reader observed, if they're talking about that openly, does this mean that they're idly speculating about, or is this some subtle boasting that, yes, our country's scientists have already made great research? And let's observe, I think you, I, and a whole bunch of our listeners would agree, human immortality is really impossible. But if you have access to the very best doctors, the very best medicines, the very best systems, there are people who live to be 100, 101. If you had every medical advantage, maybe you could live considerably longer than the average 80 years or so for a male in America today. Let's also point out that even if you say, thanks to medicine, I can live to be 100, 120, 130, Smith & Wesson may have a counter argument that will be tough to refute. But nonetheless, like these guys, I think the fact that they're talking about this is a declaration that neither one is subject to anything resembling free and fair elections. They intend to stay in power for quite some time, as long as their bodies and minds will allow them. That's probably going to mean towards the end of the Trump administration, whether it's a Vance administration or whoever takes, these are guys who are envisioning staying in power for decades, and they are in their 70s, which is, about the time you start thinking about running for president in the United States. So this is, somewhat unnerving. When I read this, I was reminded of a work of fiction. Greg, I'm going to assume you have not read The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova.
Correct.
Okay. Came out in 2005. It is a really well-written vampire novel about a historian who's asked to do research and starts finding evidence of vampires. And they kind of go through, the 1700s, 1800s into the early 20th century. And there's talk about the rise of sinister powers in Russia and in Germany. And we, the reader, know what these diary entries are alluding to, the rise of the Nazis and the rise of Soviet Russia. And there's this reference to the idea of we were now in the era of totalitarian dictators with unimaginable power, and yet we knew it would end when they died. What would happen if these people effectively became vampires? They discovered how to live much longer than the typical human lifespan. Thankfully, Putin and Xi are only metaphorical vampires. But with that said, like the idea of them living not just another 10 years in power, but 20 years, 30 years in power is very disturbing. And I think U.S. policy has to reflect these are not nice guys, and they're not going to turn into nice guys. And as we saw with certain U.S. leaders, as they get older, I don't think they get more rational. As they get older, they certainly don't get more patient. They don't get more easygoing and laid back. They tend to feel like, more ambitious. And you think you make an argument that Putin's decision-making and perhaps Xi Jinping's decision-making have changed. So, look, this might just be idle chit-chat between these two guys, but I think it's a hint that both of them intend to stick around for a very long time, and our policies ought to reflect that.
You could probably hear a little bit of work still happening at Jim's house.
Yeah, this is it's not the Russians, the Chinese coming to get me yet. Today, apparently, I'm on not one, but both countries' poop lists. I've been informed by informed sources. So one for the coverage of Ukraine, one for the coverage of the lab leak. So, as Bill Murray said, so I've got that working for me.
Well, when you consider the efficiency of the Russian military and the security of the Wuhan lab, I'm not too worried about either of these guys actually living forever. But it is a hallmark of communism, right? I mean, the idea, that's why the communists are atheists, because the state is the highest thing. They're the highest thing in the state, and therefore you're supposed to worship the dear leader instead of God. So if you believe in God, this is not your best life now. You look forward to what comes next. These guys want to just stay on top on earth as long as possible.
They are. Okay, so Putin is, pays lip service to the Russian church. A lot of people would say that his actions are atheistic. I wonder if a desire to live forever reflects a fundamental fear of what's waiting for you after you die. That you're like, oh, there's no such thing as God and we won't be judged. But man, if there is, I am screwed.
Well, I don't know how Vladimir Putin's liver or Xi Jinping's liver is doing, but for over 30% of Americans got sluggish liver, a problem that often goes undetected until the very last minute. Dose is on a mission to educate all of us on why it's so important to maintain your liver health, and it's created an incredible product to help you do just that.
Greg, Vladimir Putin is Russian, which means his liver has seen better days. Your liver is the second largest organ in your body and responsible for more than 500 functions in your body. It acts as your body's filter, flushing out those unwanted elements and breaking down what you consume into essential nutrients. So, now, the science-backed formula of DOSE, that's D-O-S-E, not dose as in number 2 in Spanish, it promotes liver function, aids digestion, eases bloating, and can even boost your energy levels.
Yeah, reduces brain fog, gets you better sleep, and it tastes good, actually. So support your health with Dose Daily. Save 25% on your first month when you subscribe at dosedaily.co/3ml or enter the code 3ml at checkout. Please note the 25% discount applies only to subscription orders, not one-time purchases. Cancel anytime, no hassle. That's dosedaily.co/3ml to get 25% off your first monthly subscription with the code 3ML. All right, Gen Z, buckle up. And Gen Z's parents, you need to listen to this too, because these numbers are absolutely mind-blowing. We thought Gen Z was kind of starting to figure things out. They voted a lot better in the last election than millennials, who've always stayed hard left. But there's a new survey out from Resume Templates, and they interviewed a bunch of Gen Z workers, 831 of them, who work full-time, to understand, this is their language, how involved their parents were in their most recent job search and their current role. First of all, let's go through the headline numbers. And then after that, it gets even weirder. 31% of Gen Zers had a parent write their resume. 77% brought a parent to an interview. 53% had a parent speak with a hiring manager on their behalf. 45% regularly, not once in a while, regularly have a parent talk to their current manager. 73% have their parents help complete work assignments, and 57% have brought a parent to their current workplace. Oh, but it gets so much better than that. When it comes to the interviews, almost 45% went to the location but stayed outside or didn't join the on-camera interview, depending on how the interview was done. But 40% sat in the room or joined the call. Nearly 35% answered questions on the child's behalf. 30% asked the interviewer questions, and nearly 30% helped to negotiate salary or benefits. And then when you talk about the fact that they've got their parent regularly checking in with their boss, Jim, I cannot imagine a boss wanting to deal with that. If you've got an issue, the employee should come to them directly here. So you got these people who are probably living in their parents' basement, which is verified by the fact that a huge percentage of them, 83%, have their parents pack their lunch for work. And the parents are actively involved seemingly every day in their work life. So I don't think this is good. This is very, very different from the world we grew up in.
Greg, I hear those anecdotes, and I'm having traumatic flashbacks between freshman year and sophomore year of college. I go back home to New Jersey, and I need to find a job, go to a temp agency. And I was really hoping for some sort of like office clerical work, being the guy who answers the phones, files stuff. I was told, no, we don't have any of those jobs, but we do have an office job for you. So I go over to Baxter Healthcare. It's a healthcare supply company. And they say, all right, we'll take you, college boy. Go, and I'm loading stuff onto trucks, and we're putting out the pallets, wrapping it all up in plastic, using a forklift, putting it on there. And the shifts ran really long. So I think I got there 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon somewhere. It was not unheard of to do a 12-hour shift. Anywhere your shift could be anywhere from 9 to 11. So my first day, I'm there, and I'm like, well, I'll go home and you went home when the work was done. Like, when the last shipment had been filled and nothing needed to be done till the next day. So there was unpredictability. This is pre-cell phones, to give you a sense of just how old I am. And I don't call home to say, hey, I'm going to be working late. So I don't know, around 10, 11, 12, something like that. My parents, who are wonderful, caring people, and maybe a little on the overprotective, very on the overprotective side looking back, decide, well, we know where. They call up the temp agency and say, where is our son? And I said, well, he reported to work at Baxter Healthcare warehouse in this part of New Jersey. And Dad drove there to check on me and came in, saw me, waved, spoke to my, then temp boss. It was utterly mortifying. And I know they had the very best of intentions. But anyway, as you can imagine, being the college kid working amongst all these blue collar guys whose dad showed up to check on him did amazing wonders for my reputation amongst my coworkers. And by no stretch of the imagination did I get ridicule or mocking or anything like that for the rest of the summer. In the end, I ended up making. But for those of you who think I've never done any blue collar work, that was my experience. And it sucked, and that's why I ran it quickly as possible back into the world of white-collar work. But I just want to observe that, like, if I find that utterly just feeling my soul ripped out of me levels of embarrassment, just thinking about that today. How can you possibly show up with your parents to the job interview? And I sit back and I think, Greg, you've got 2 adorable little girls, who maybe aren't so little anymore, I guess. I've got 2 guys, one in college, one in high school. And one of the hardest things in the world to do in life is to watch your child fail. Watch your child stumble. And if you think your child is going to have some sort of really consequential failure, get addicted to drugs, like there are times where you're going to have to rush in. But if every time you felt like your kid was going to stumble, you rushed in, then your child will never fall and your child will never learn to walk on their own. Eventually you learn. So you have to let your child learn how to walk, and they have to learn how to read. They have to learn how to, all these things that ultimately you can't do it for them. So I get why this is hard. On the other hand, if you are always there metaphorically or literally holding your child's hand as they go through every major transition and challenge in life, they'll never function. They'll never figure out how to do it on their own. And sad to say, as much as Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping don't want to hear it, we're all going to die someday. All right. We all want our children to outlive us. So they have to learn how to live independently. They have to figure out how to do these things without themselves. So I know parents of Gen Z who are attending the job interviews, I know you think you're helping, but you're not. And oftentimes failure is how we learn how to do things. As I think it was Tony Robbins who said, good judgment is often the consequence of experience, and experience is often the consequence of bad judgment. So you need to have bad judgment before you get to good judgment. If you can get good judgment right the first time, great. God bless you. It's wonderful. Most of us have to make mistakes, and we learn from those mistakes, and then we become better at all these things we have to do in life. So Gen Z parents, please. And the other thing is great. A lot of these parents are probably Gen X. We can't blame this one on the boomers.
That's really disappointing or even depressing. I mean, it's fine to ask advice. Hey, should I phrase it like this on the resume? Or what questions do you think I might face in the interview? Or, hey, I got the job. This guy's kind of a jerk. Yeah. How should I handle that? That's fine. But to have your parents interacting with your boss or your supervisor is insane. Listen to this. 50% say a parent spoke to their manager about a workplace conflict. 49% say a parent helped them ask for time off. How hard is that? 46% say a parent was involved in a conversation about getting a raise, and similar numbers about a promotion. So, I mean, if you want a raise or a promotion, I think being able to ask for it will probably go a little bit better than mommy or daddy coming in and saying, hey, Timmy over here is doing a great job, don't you think? How about a few more bucks?
Greg, do you have a role in selecting the interns over at Radio America?
Absolutely.
Okay. Have they ever brought their parent to an interview? Or have you ever, other than, oh, hey, it's my birthday, my boss is, my dad's visiting me in the office or something. Has there ever been anything where you've interacted with the parent of one of your interns?
No, unless they bring them through the studio just to show them where they work. That's it.
Yeah, no harm in that.
Yeah,
first of all, this is a good reflect. Clearly, it's not everybody in Generation Z. Clearly, there are some who are functioning and who get all that stuff. That I just find baffling. And I can't imagine what it's like to be one of those superiors and say, oh, I know you want to take that day off, but, we really have we're doing inventory that day. It's right before the end of the year, fiscal debt, whatever reason. I'm sorry, you can't take off that day. I'm going to tell my dad. Is your dad the CEO? Is there somebody who is your dad? If you're Baron Trump, yes, go tell your dad. Then I think it's going to have some consequence. Otherwise, I think it's interesting. I wrote a little bit about this in Heavy Lifting, and you can see portions of this in the characters in The Weed Agency. Early 20s in Washington. All of my friends were starting out in our careers, and like we get together for happy hour on Friday night, and I look around the table, and we all, as I put it, we all look like we've been beaten by dogs. And I'm not even 100% sure what that phrase means. It just meant like, we're interns or we're starting out, we're low man on the totem pole, getting all the grunt work, boss is yelling at it. It's really terrible. But like, this is what makes you able to function in the workplace, right? You begin to get a sense of this is what the standard is. This is how you have to deliver. And yeah, it always sucks when you start out, but that's what makes you into the people who can handle it. And you can't be bubble wrapped too far into life, or else at some point the bubble wrap is going to go away and you're going to fall to pieces. So just ask your boss for the day off. Once that happens is they say no.
Jim, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.
You're going to hear from my dad, Greg. See you tomorrow.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you haven't already, get your friends to do it too. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.